We are recording the meeting and it is being broadcast live through Tempe 11 with our Tempe 11 producer, Greg Wolf. We will be also recording items in chat and publishing those as part of the documentation of this session. We are working on a session board called Miro, and you can find that in your Zoom chat by clicking on the link that our tech producer has put in there for you. We're on the first slide, our welcome slide 1.01. And as we get started here, feel free to add something that you remember from our last session, as well as something you might want to share with the group of something that you've learned, and then maybe something you're thankful for this holiday season. So to get started, I'm going to move to 1.02, and you can follow me by looking at my circled picture at the top of the Miro board, or you can also click in the upper right-hand corner of the frame, and you'll see a blue arrow, and that'll take you to the next frame. So I just wanted to go over some technical support here for you. In navigating in Miro, there are 4 key things or 4 areas that I'd like to take your attention to, which is in the upper right-hand corner of Miro. You have where you see number 1 here. You can hide cursors. You can follow me. That's where my face is, up in the right-hand corner. And those are kind of the 2 big keys that you might need for tonight. Down in the lower right-hand corner, you have a navigation panel that's kind of like a mini map. If you get lost, you also can look at the mini map to try to find where we might want to be as far as the slides go. In the lower left-hand corner, you may have to expand this particular toolbar, but my favorite tool here is to look for the icon that looks like a garden gate. And when you click on that, it'll show you the outline view of all of the frames. And that's similar to what you might see in PowerPoint, if you're familiar with that. And moving up to the left-hand corner, or between the number 3 and the number 4, you can add comments. You can, it's kind of our collaboration toolbar. You can drag a sticky note over if you want to drop a note in as we do some of our work here tonight. And you can, like I said, you can also leave a comment, and we'll include those as part of the documentation. So I'm going to go ahead and move to our next slide, and this is basically your screen setup. If you have 2 devices, we suggest logging into Zoom on your phone and then using your tablet or your laptop for Miro to give you the best visual space. There's some suggestions here in regards to how you might set up your screen, in regards to having Miro being the majority of your screen, and then being able to see our colleagues here on the call through the participant view with Zoom. And with that, I will go ahead and move to our opening welcome with our mayor, and so I turn it over to our mayor, Corey Woods.
Thank you, Whitell. I'll be very, very brief. Just wanted to thank everyone again for this is the 4th meeting of 6 for the Public Safety Advisory Task Force. And once again, just wanted to say I really appreciate everyone being here and giving up your personal volunteer time to help us in our quest to really continue to try to drive police policy, not only in 2020, but frankly into the future. I think that we are and can be a model for police departments, not only frankly throughout the Valley, but the entire country. But your input here is critical in terms of informing us about where the community would like for us to go from here. So I just really appreciate you once again being here and sharing your time with us and sharing your passion and your input and professionalism. And with that, I'll go back and turn it over to Whitell.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that. So we're going to move to our public comment, and that is slide 1.05. That is our frame. So if you want to also kind of drag over to that, you can certainly do that as well. And I'll turn that over to Brianne to see if we have any public comments for this evening. We do have a maximum time limit of 30 minutes, and we'll see what Brianne has to report in regards to our public comments.
Hello, we actually do not have any submitted public comments for this evening. So,
all right, thank you, Brianne. So with that, I'm going to actually move to if you're navigating in Miro, I'm going to the next row, or I'm clicking on the blue arrow. And I'd like to welcome Rosa and Chalsty to provide us with our session overview tonight. And I say that as if she's a stranger to me, but she's my director. So Rosa, here you go.
And she acts as if we don't spend every waking
I
moment.
know. I don't know why I sounded so formal there.
Well, welcome. Good evening, everyone. It's always a pleasure to have you join us again, as the mayor said. Thank you for your volunteerism. We really appreciate your time, and we're going to get right into trying to make up a little time from the last meeting, but we are always flexible in allowing for great dialogue, which I think took place at the last meeting. Just a quick review at the Tuckman's model. I thought that was helpful, and I heard back from a few of you regarding how do we understand where we are right now in this group activity and this sharing and exchange of this very important work. We identified we were definitely in the storming phase after the last meeting, but I could see towards the end of the meeting, we were definitely stepping into that norming phase of looking at how do we come to some consensus, facilitation, discussion. So we're looking forward to continuing that conversation today, picking up where we left off. In the next slide is just identifying the strategic planning process, which Wydell and I shared with you during the first session back in October. And this is really a slide that helps us contextualize where we are right now, with knowing that we were going to remain flexible and understanding that a size of this the group size that we do have and the various perspectives that we would need to be flexible, and that's exactly what's happened. So really, once again, the purpose is to establish a strategic plan designed to build trust, accountability, and dialogue between the communities and our police department. So if we look back and step back at October 13th, where we had the orientation, thank you for signing up and understanding a new platform with Miro. We're, I think, the only city in the state using Miro to this extent that I know of. So thank you for your flexibility in the technology. The SWOT analysis took place in October, October 28th, understanding some initial conversations regarding our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, and really our threats as we are navigating through these issues. And looking at November 4th, there was some flexibility and we canceled that meeting, listening to all of you. And then November 13th or 10th, a case study that was very powerful. And thank you all for the feedback, the text messages, the conversations the next morning. It just helps to know that this is meaningful work and that what basically the curriculum or the facilitation is helpful. And that's really what our impetus is trying to make sure that we create the setting and the documentations and the information that's helpful for all of you to help us. So we are now at December 2nd, strategic planning framework, as you can see there. We are continuing the conversation and what you will have at the end of this session, and I promise you, is the framework, which then leads to the next meeting, which will be adding the strategies to advancing the buckets or the themes, as I call them, to a strategic plan. So today's process, to contextualize what we're doing, what informs our planning from the case study, the SWOT analysis, and the pre-survey. So we started with the pre-survey, if you all recall, and then we did a SWOT analysis, as I shared with you during that first meeting, and then we did that case study. So based on those 3 data points, we will share with you the framework that has been established by all of you. So we will have first a follow-up to the questions from November 10th, and we will take about 20 minutes to have Chief Glover and Assistant Chief Mike Pooley and Mike Horn share with you and give you some answers to the many questions we heard last time. So we thought we would start with that, and then we would break out into the same groups that we had last time to finish the conversation that then would refine, bringing back those ideas to the larger group. The larger group will then listen to everyone's basically feedback, and then that would be the results of the evening. That will give us the insights to inform our planning for the next session. And as I said, what we will have, as I always work on outcomes, so at the end of this session, we will have a strategic planning framework and then prepare for strategy, which identifies what are the ways that we help move the needles to those specific headers or buckets, or as we say, goals that we're trying to accomplish. So I know we wrote homework, and all of us get a little twitch when we see that, especially those of us in our 50s. But I can assure you it's homework that's thoughtful and not necessarily work that you need to write down unless you're a writer. But it's really coming back to prepare ourselves to what are some things, tangible things that we can help advance the strategic plan with. The next slide.
Okay, we are on slide 3.01, and we will move to Interim Chief Police Chief Jeff Glover. And this is, as Rosa said in our agenda, we will be taking some time to do a moderated Q&A, or actually answers to questions. It's more of a moderated response session. But I'll turn it over to the chief, please.
Yes, thank you, Wydell. Good evening, everyone. We're getting into the case study session that, these very tragic circumstances regarding the Antonio Arce case. And tonight we'll have some answers to some of the questions that you had from the third session. I have Assistant Chief Mike Pooley and Commander Mike Horn, who are going to address some of the questions that you all had in our third session that we didn't get to be able to have conversation or provide some context to any of those questions. And so now we have the opportunity to provide you a little bit of insight into that. So with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Wydell to now moderate that portion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We felt that in order to really honor all the questions and as well as the time frames that we do work within, is we took all the questions that you had provided to us in the chat and on Miro. If any questions were left off, that's my fault. So I will take that. But we have organized them into case-specific questions in regards to the Arce case. And then we also have some general questions that were generated from that case analysis. So I will be asking the questions to the Assistant Chief and to Commander Horn, and also they'll provide the context to the questions. We won't be doing group questions and answers at this stage, because we do want to be able to get through at least the majority of the questions that you had last time. So we'll pick up kind of where we left off in regards to that. So with that, on my first question is to Assistant Chief Pooley. I know Commander Horn's going to support you in some of the details, but one of the questions was framed around first aid. And one of the questions regarding the Arce case was there an order for the EMS crew to stage until the scene was secure? And that also begs the question, between the time that Arce was shot, or I'm sorry, Antonio Arce was shot, when was first aid provided? So if, Mike, if you could speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. First off, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with everyone, and I'm hoping I can help answer some questions and give a little bit of clarity. Some of these answers may not be what you want to hear, but that's what we're here for, to listen to you. For this specific question, one of the things that we did do is immediately after Officer Hine had fired his weapon, if you remember watching the video, he runs down the alleyway. And when he sees Antonio laying in the street, he immediately notifies our dispatch that there's an individual that's been shot. At that point, our dispatch immediately notified Tempe Fire Medical Rescue. Typically, when we get any type of call or our officers see somebody that's injured, they immediately do notify Tempe Fire Medical Rescue. Now, there's a couple things that go into effect here. When fire department does respond, or EMS does respond to a call that there's some type of violent potential, they will stage, which in their words, they're just waiting to make sure the scene is safe for them. They aren't trained police officers. They're there to give medical attention. And one of the things that happened is it took about 6 minutes for our officers to get there and start the initial first aid. And within about 6 more minutes, Tempe Fire Medical Rescue was on scene and transporting Antonio to the hospital. And that's the answer to that one.
Okay. Following up to that, in regards to Antonio's unresponsiveness, there was a question about handcuffing someone who's unresponsive while first aid is also being administered.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we've seen is we do training on these. Anytime our officers are involved in any type of critical incident, if there's somebody that is perceived to be a suspect in a crime, they are initially handcuffed. Although it does not look pretty, it's we've seen in cases where the person that was a suspect does attempt to do something. I'll tell you, one of the things when you watch this, we didn't know his complete condition. We do know he was incapacitated. The officers had to make that decision, and when fire gets there, they have the decision to unhandcuff the individual, and at the request of the fire department as well.
Okay, thank you. Just the other piece to this is still on the scene with the witnesses in regards to confiscating phones from witnesses. What is the process for that?
So at this time, when you look back right now, we didn't know who was involved and who was not involved initially. Whenever an officer, we go to a scene, we have to determine if there's anybody that's potentially involved or if there's evidence. At the initial onset of this, we didn't know if there were more individuals or not. Their phones were confiscated. Once it was determined that they weren't involved, they were all returned immediately back to the individuals.
Okay. And so this has been a recurring topic that has come up during the task force discussion, and it evolves around family engagement. Can you tell us a little bit about the notification process for his parents, even after it was determined that Antonio was a minor?
So initially, we did not know who Antonio Arce was. There was not a way for us to identify him. He had no identification on him. We knew he was more than likely a minor, and we were running different databases. We were trying to check to see if we could find out who he was, and nothing came back. At about just before 10 o'clock that night, so if you remember, the incident happened at just before 3 o'clock, about 2:54 in the afternoon. At about 10 o'clock, we got a call from mom. Mom notified us that her son had not returned home. Our officer got out there about 10:23, 10:25, about 25 minutes after receiving the call. And again, he was taking information. And at some point during the conversation, the officer realized on scene that this was potentially Antonio Arce's mother. At that point, he was able to get the cell phone number, his mom's cell phone, and they called Antonio Arce's cell phone and were able to identify that that was him. I'll tell you, once we were able to make that connection, our detectives immediately went out to the house and made notification. Now, was it done in the quickest manner possible? I look at it, and as a parent, it probably could have been done faster if we would have been able to make that identification a lot sooner. But unfortunately, it did take us till just about midnight before we got out there and made that notification to Antonio's mother.
Okay. Accountability has been another theme recurring throughout our discussions over the last few sessions. And the questions revolved from our last session around the ability to charge the officer, remove the pension, and the perceived perception about going on FMLA prior to the investigation. Can you speak to that, Mike?
Yeah. So something to note here is all police officers in the state of Arizona are part of the public safety retirement system. The public safety retirement system is completely independent of the police department for which they work, to include Tempe Police Department. The public safety retirement system is also set by state law. And again, like I said, it's apart from the police department, and we don't have control for that. As far as the FMLA is concerned, I can tell you that was one of our frustrations as well. FMLA is, again, it's a federally protected status that is also independent of the police department. When anybody in any workforce goes on FMLA, it gives them certain protections, to include our officers as well. I'll tell you, in this investigation, it was very frustrating for us when we were trying to do this investigation. There were certain stipulations and guidelines that we had to take into account. And I can tell you, since this has happened, we have changed the way we do our internal investigations because of this specific case. Typically, we would wait a lengthy or a certain amount of time before we would do an interview. We now, if we think that we need to get this interview done faster, we immediately do it. And I'll tell you, police work is always evolving. We learn from these things. And this is one example that we saw in these internal investigations where we said, we need to do these quicker and we need to make sure they're done faster in a more appropriate manner. So that was something that came up out of this.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Continuing along the lines of accountability, were there other?
I think you might have froze. Anybody else see her frozen, or is that just me?
No, she is frozen, and it might be the Wi-Fi.
Rosa, this is Lauren. While we're waiting for her to come back on, could we have follow-up questions? I see there's a bunch in the chat about some of the answers that Mike had given.
Absolutely. So while we're waiting for Wydell, Mike, can you see the chat?
I can, yeah. So I'm looking at Vidia Hernandez's question. What is the protocol to not answering the calls the mom made throughout the day? I am not aware of any calls that were made throughout the day. I apologize. I wish I had that answer. I don't. I will have to look into that one for you. The next one is about the 14-year-old. You know, I'll tell you, when we got out there, when our officers got out there, we did have that feeling that he was underage. Again, there's not a way for us to tell until we make that positive identification. I know when Officer Hine did look at Antonio Arce, he immediately believed he was underage as well. And that's one of those things that I wish I could tell you that we were able to get him ID'd quicker.
Mike, do you have the list of the questions that we were going to facilitate?
I do.
Perfect. So perhaps you can just read the question and then answer it.
Yeah, you bet. So what other results, ramifications were considered for the officer, for Officer Hine, and why is this result the right one? So we were never able to completely conclude our internal investigation prior to Officer Hine submitting his paperwork for a medical retirement. When we did finish, he had already retired. And when we were when we came out with it, we did talk about it, and we knew that we were going to recommend termination of Officer Hine. We never were able to get to that point, unfortunately. And had we gotten to that point, he would have been terminated.
Thank you. I apologize. My internet had some interruptions there, but I'm back on. Thank you for continuing. In regards to the general questions that were generated by our last session, there was a request for clarification on city policy and process regarding disciplinary actions, especially in the case where negligence and, most importantly, the loss of life has occurred.
So we have a very thorough internal investigation process and disciplinary process. We have a unit, it's called our professional standards. Many people may call it internal affairs. We have dedicated personnel where they look into conduct of officers specifically. And that's their full-time job. On this one, it would be very lengthy to get into the entire process, how that works. But specific to this case, we did conclude through the internal investigation that Officer Hine was out of policy in regards to his use of force. Most importantly, the loss of life of Antonio Arce was an aggravating circumstance and just absolutely heartbreaking. With the conclusion of the investigation, termination would have been recommended for Officer Hine in this case.
Thank you. Um, Going a little bit beyond, but still a process question, is in regards to the citizen review panel and what training they have and just kind of the general purpose of the panel.
Commander Horn is going to answer that one. He has a better understanding of that.
Hi there. So on the citizen review panel, and this is set by the city ordinance. And on the citizen review panel, there's a process that goes through. There's an application that anybody who's interested can fill out through the city clerk's office. It's on the city clerk's webpage. And then that information, each one of those applications are reviewed in line with what's in the ordinance. And then everybody who submits those applications that basically meet the criteria established by the ordinance, those go to the city manager, who then works with the mayor and then council, ultimately to select members who go on the panel to serve specific terms. And then the training specifically, each one of them get training in use of force policy, and we'll also put them through different scenarios, different situations, similar to the training that officers go through for experience purposes. And then we'll do additional training as it may be appropriate for certain cases that are coming up. And right now, this year, we're trying to figure out how to kind of revamp that just in a pandemic world right now, and but that's simplified kind of the training that they go through.
Thanks, Mike. In regards to the officers' mental health, fitness for duty, as well as physical health, what's the physical requirements to be a Tempe police officer?
So the initial hiring process, it is very basic. It's a running, push-ups, sit-ups. It's a strength test to make sure they can do the minimum to go through the academy. When they go through the academy, they do learn more fitness. They learn a lot about health. They learn a lot more about what is going to work for them. It is their responsibility to maintain their physical fitness. I can tell you here at the police department, we do encourage it. We have a wellness program that we're developing where the wellness part is the physical fitness component of it. We do not have current requirements to requalify physically fit to take a physical fitness exam every year. Specific job duties like SWAT, they do an annual physical fitness process, but other parts of the department do not.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, still along the line of fitness for duty, is the mental health requirements for officers, as well as the review to determine their continued fitness for duty. And how is that determined and how is that reviewed?
So the mental health requirements are evaluated by mental health experts. We're not the mental health experts. We send them off to a psychologist that specializes in police functions and police duties. And it's the ones that evaluate, they speak with personally, they test the candidates to become police officers. And we really look to them to determine whether or not an individual is mentally healthy or mentally fit to become a police officer.
Okay, great. And is that reviewed by more than one person, or is it a panel of psychologists? Just as a clarifying question on that one.
It is reviewed by multiple people, but one psychologist and other people throughout the hiring process as well.
Okay. Continuing along that same topic, what are the red flags that you look for when an officer should not be on the streets?
So a lot of that, we rely on our first line supervisors. Our first line supervisors are referred to as the sergeants. Every sergeant has approximately 5 to 7 officers. They're with them at the start of shift, throughout the shift, and to the end of the shift. They have communication, and it's just like any good boss. They need to make sure that the officers are showing up to work. They're physically and mentally capable to do the job. Some of the training that we provide for our supervisors is of the wellness and understanding and recognizing signs and symptoms of those that are in distress. And again, one of the things that we see is that our officers they're involved in a lot of traumatic incidents. They are involved with people on a bad day, on their worst day typically. And it's our job as supervisors to make sure that when an officer is involved in any type of critical incident, that they are talked to, that they try to get them any type of peer support necessary, or any other psychological support as well.
Great, thank
Yeah,
you.
and Commander Horn's going to add to that as well.
I think
Sure,
one of the
Mike?
things that this is a kind of an area that all law enforcement and certainly Tempe is trying to get better at. And one of the things we're doing also, and Chief Pooley just kind of alluded to that as well, is when people are involved in critical incidents, is that there is some sort of documentation that happens with that, and there's several different tracks in which that can happen. The other thing is that we through other review mechanisms, through reviewing use of force, and we have a force review committee. There's other things that happen that we are reviewing, and when we see red flags, which could be, I can't think of an example right now, but just something that just doesn't feel right, doesn't look right. Maybe it's just their lack of professionalism. Maybe it's we see a couple different cases over a period of time that are a little bit concerning. Those are things that we then initiate a certain process to begin following up with those officers. And one of the things we're working on now in the infancy stages is coming up with a system. And I know Chief Glover and Rosa have been in conversations with potential outside vendor to help us with this, to connect all our different databases that we have into a place that can help us better with that, which is something we're working through right now as well.
Right, thank you. I'm shifting a little bit to or another procedural question was in regards to having just one officer in the vehicle that responds, and would having two create a situation where a less lethal stance might be taken?
That's hard to answer exactly what the result would have happened. We have the majority of our patrol officers, they do ride solo. We have had times where we partner officers up together and they ride and they respond to calls for service together. We do know that officers do act differently when they're with another officer, and they have more confidence. They have ability to do different type of tactics, and that is very likely that this could have changed the outcome on that.
Okay, great. So in regards to lethal force, this kind of shifts to training in regards to the de-escalation as well as diversity training that officers receive, and how do they renew or attend training, kind of that maintenance mode as well?
So our training is a pretty robust training that they do, that our officers are required to go to multiple times a year for full day training. A lot of our training is scenario-based training, where we involve stress inoculation. We try to get them in a real life, almost a real life setting, where we see how they react. We look at their judgment. We look at how they respond. We look at how they talk to people, how they react, the type of words they're using, body language. One of the things that we're very proud of is a recent de-escalation training that we have created that's been, now it's being nationally recognized as a training that is going to be helpful to officers. Half of our department has gone through that training. And we are currently getting ready at the first of the year to start sending the other half into this training. And from what we have seen and what the research has shown is that this training is very beneficial. Our officers are understanding a lot better on when they need to walk away or when they need to wait. And that's a big part of it. That's a big cultural shift for law enforcement that you're gonna see a big difference on that, and we have.
Okay. And I think kind of getting in as a general question, but also related to the Antonio Arce case, are officers trained to shoot to kill? So can you speak into regards to when an officer pulls a weapon, what is the procedure at that point, especially when they have made that decision to fire the weapon?
So our officers, and I can tell you, speaking just personally from that, when our officers, when they go to training, that is not what we train them. We train them to use the least amount of force possible to stop a threat. If it is needed, the firearm, that is the very last resort that we want our officers to use. And when they do fire, they do shoot, and they will fire to stop a threat.
Mhm. Thank you. So with that, we are almost at 5. The other questions that are coming in over the chat, we will provide those to the police department and provide a manner that we can get those also addressed to the task force. This would be a time for me to remind you that we do have our Public Safety Advisory Task Force webpage that you can access. We'll be sure to send that out to you again in the chat, as well as in a follow-up email with your homework that Rosa mentioned earlier. We're trying to put articles as well as all of the documentation from your work and your ideas out there. So it's a resource to you as well as to the community. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to turn it back over to Chief Glover for any final comments before we move to our next session, which is a reflection of what work we've done to date.
Thank you, Wydell. So I know that there's a lot of information that's going through the chat right now, and I'm reading some of it. We will try to get to some of the questions and some of the points that you've raised within the chat box, as well as you know, just speak to some of the other additional questions that may come out of the conversations that are coming up. We really do thank the input and some of the feedback that we are getting, because this is something that's needed in terms of just being able to move forward and understanding exactly how we need to implement the change within the department. So with that, I'll kick it back over to you, Wydell. So we start with our
Yeah,
group.
one item has caught my attention in the chat that is, I'll take the onus of, maybe I didn't ask the question with the intent that was behind it when we did have this discussion in a previous session, is whether or not, are we training officers to shoot to injure or to shoot to kill? And I think that was at the core of the discussion in a previous session. So I want to correct the way I asked that question, and maybe Mike Pooley, you could respond to that in that sense of the nature of the question now.
Yeah, I appreciate it. No, and I understand. So we do not shoot specifically to kill somebody. We shoot and we know that it is going to injure somebody, and there is a very high likelihood that they will die from their injuries. One of the things, the areas that we do aim to shoot and at is the mid-torso area. And, you know, for us, we've had several incidents, and we've seen several incidents where people have been shot and they survive. We've had incidents where people get shot and they unfortunately, they do not survive. So when we shoot and we train to shoot, we shoot at certain target areas that we know very potentially will kill somebody. But what we want is we want the threat to stop. If the person stops what it is, then whatever the threat is, then that's what our biggest hope is that we're trying to get.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we're going to shift. I appreciate everybody, your attention to the responses and allowing this time to be provided to follow up on the questions that you had from previous sessions. We've tried to continue to do that throughout all of these sessions. But we also know that one of the purpose of the group is also to move towards learning from our cases, learning from our SWOT analysis, as well as the pre-work survey, moving us towards a planning framework so that we can start implementation of your recommendations. One of the things I'm moving to now, slide 4.02, and if you are lost, you can follow me at the top of the Miro board. And what I'd like to do is just to show you in regards to where some of the information that we'll find in the strategic framework that we'll see a little bit later here is, you did a SWOT analysis, which was to answer the question in regards to, you know, what strengths do we bring to this? What forces do we have as a community, as colleagues, as individuals, to bring to creating trust and accountability and dialogue with our police and our community. So you did do that, and just want to highlight a couple things that really stood out. Is you notice that there's a willingness to include community who's been most negatively impacted and previously excluded. You also indicated that this is a political environment where reforms are possible. And also one of the strong strengths that, or one of the prominent strengths that you brought out is that we acknowledge the need to be inclusive with the Black and Brown community. And then moving to our weaknesses, some of the items that were more prominent, and I'm now moving to slide 4.03, is the lack of true accountability for excessive force and racial profiling. That was an item when we had you do the dotocracy that you thought was a prominent item that we should keep in mind as we frame our planning. There are various ones there. I think the next kind of one is, if we looked at just the number of dots, is the lack of transparency relating to holding police accountability. And I think some of the questions that you've generated also are reflective of that. I'm going to move you now from your weakness work into your opportunities work. One of the items of prominence was having better data, and that would lead to better policy over time. And I think Commander Horn just spoke to that in regards to integration of data systems. The other item is expanding our Care 7 model, and you had a lot of conversation around this in regards to the role of police and the role of using our trauma-informed services in regards to, you know, as a balance to policing. And then you also focused on, let's see here, there were several that the focus needs to be driven directly to those needing the services. And that goes in line in regards, again, to the Care 7 model. I'm moving to slide 4.05, and these were some of the threats that you indicated at our session on October 28th. And you really thought a threat is the lack of trust. And you'll notice that the purpose of the task force is to build avenues and strategies where we can create trust and accountability. But another item that you also noted of prominence is the lack of resources. And that might also lead to, in regards to some of the strategies as you start to think with your homework, what would that look like if we didn't have a lack of resources? Another item that came to light is that people believe that PD is not transparent in hiding or manipulating data. And so as we continue through our planning process, we are committed, and Chief Glover said this earlier, in regards to continuing to provide you the information that we do have in the manner that we can. And then again, I go back to the web page that we have created for the task force. So with that, I'd like to take you to another piece here, and I'm going to be moving over to slide 4.06. And you'll remember you went into your breakout rooms last time for the very first time, and had some really great discussion in regards to ideas that would help inform our planning based on the case study. You also brought ideas forward from your pre-workshop survey, as well as your individual and collective experiences. So in our next exercise, we're going to be taking you back into some breakout rooms because we wanted you to finish that work, because it does help us create that strategic framework that is so important to moving to specific strategies and actions that you can recommend for implementation. So just as a reminder, when I move to the next slide, you'll see all of the ideas from the green room and the orange room and the gold room, and we'll have everything together. But I just wanted to remind you of where you were so that you could identify your group's ideas and then also see what other ideas came to bear with this. So as we move to slide 4.07, before we put you in groups, and we're keeping you in the same groups, and similar to the last time, we'll have our colleagues from the PD wait in the main session room. The ideas that you had from session 3 were vast. And so we've collected all of those ideas that you had in your individual groups. You'll notice that room 1, the room that I was facilitating, is in green. The room that Janae facilitated is in orange, and the room that Rosa facilitated is in gold. So you don't have to remember your room number, you just need to have to remember who your facilitator was. But one of the things we're going to ask you to do as a group is to read through the ideas that you generated from the last session, as well as the ideas that the other groups generated. And then we have some space here that if there's some ideas that are missing, to please add those as a group. And then also, if there's something that needs clarity for you, if maybe the idea intrigues you, but you're not sure what the intent was behind that idea, we can have some time to ask the group that created that idea to explain and share their thoughts and their intentions behind it. And then finally, we'll ask that you spend some time identifying the ideas that seem most essential for you, from your lens, from your perspective, to inform the planning that we'll be doing in this and in future sessions. So with that, are there any process questions that I can answer in regards to this at this stage before we move into breakout rooms? Okay, if not, I know Rosa and Janae are ready to be there. We do have in the gold room, Brianne helping us scribing, and then Elisa in the orange room, and then Nikki is in the green room with me. So I'll go ahead and ask Elisa to move us into our breakout room.
Elisa, you want us to let you know if somebody pops back in?
It's like you're reading my mind. I'm
I
going to go ahead
know.
and put my cell in the chat here.
Thank you.
So if you can just text me if somebody comes in, and I will come right back. Thanks, y'all.
All right.
Like you've done this before, right?
I know you're becoming expert.
Thank you.
I have to find my room now. All right, number 2. There we go.
Hey, Jeff, I'll call you.
Okay.
Okay, as everybody's coming back, we didn't lose anybody in the virtual world. So we, let's see, we have some more people coming back in. So we're remaining on slide 4.07 for ideas.
Wydale, would you mind clicking
Yes.
out of the sticky note that you were just editing because we don't see what you
My
typed in.
apologies.
Yeah, thank you.
There we go. There we go. So we have ideas from session 3, as well as completing that as much as we can, the thought process from session 3, which we're learning from the tragic case of Antonio Arce that informs our planning, and kind of finishing out our thought process during the breakout rooms. And so I want to, I see some red dots, and I'm going to be curious from the group 2 what those are about. And I'm thinking those are dots that might need some clarification. And if that's the case,
that was me going rogue, Wydale.
That's fine. Love it, love it. So why don't we start with those that, was it your group that needed clarification on one of your own cards?
No, our dots simply meant what was most essential. So we've
okay.
noted it down as well, but those dots just indicated most essential.
Great, because you'll have this documentation as part of your homework, which will be helping you as far as with your homework goes. So we'll keep those on there. The other piece was, is there any, and I'll just start with, Janae, your group, since you're up and you were unmuted, was there anything from your group, or somebody can chime in as well, that you needed clarification from a different group? So if you were in the orange group, was there something in the green or gold cards that needed clarification for you that you wanted to learn more about, as far as the intent or the?
No, none was voiced, but if I can, I personally, though I believe I know what it is, I would love to hear more about shifting the mindset from warrior to guardian. I believe I know, but I think that would be a great one to explore.
Great. If it's okay, we'll call on someone from the green group to speak to that. We actually just ended our conversation talking about that. So
we did.
Looks like Pam's ready.
I can speak to that a little bit, Jonae. We this was actually in our breakout session from our last meeting, discussing that as part of the training that needs to change, that officers are to be moved away from this mentality of being that the community is the enemy, and that they are there as warriors in the community to guard against any evil doing. We would prefer to have our officers trained as guardians of the community, friends of the community, embedded in the community in a way that helps them to understand the neighborhoods, the individuals, and the problems that are faced in those neighborhoods. So this would be a change, a move away from a militarized notion in training, and more toward a community-based opportunity to be guardians and helpers in that community. Does that help?
Thank you, Pam. Okay. Are there any other cards that needed explanation or clarification? I mean,
can I add some clarification to that?
Sure.
So I think when we initially put that down, it was in reference to the training that Tempe police receive that specifically states that they have the warrior mindset. We just dropped the link in the chat for everyone to have. And so instead of approaching situations as though they are the predator seeking out prey, they are more of, a guardian, and they're approaching the situation as wanting to de-escalate the threat rather than seeking to take out. I mean, I'm not using my words right, but
one of the things they say in there is that you have to kill first or be killed. That's one of the things they train in that training, and you can look in there. And that was found through a discovery, through a lawsuit around police brutality in Tempe.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for dropping that information into the chat for everyone to have access to, since you referenced it. Any other cards that need clarification? Try to get my attention, or
Not from
raise your
group two,
hand.
Idell. Thank you.
Think we're good? Okay. How about anything from the gold group? Did you have anything that needed clarification?
We did not. We
Okay.
did add some additional post-its and
Yes.
items that we'll discuss as a group, but nothing as far as, unless a group member has anything different that's changed in the last 4 minutes. Okay,
No.
we're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I'll call on the green group last. We did add some cards as well that you can see if you scroll a little bit down, a little bit off of the frame there. But were there any clarification of other cards from other groups that we needed? I don't think there might have been, so making sure we're kind of looking here. Okay. Seeing no hands raised, then with that, I want to thank you for kind of being able to pick up from our last session, and with that and having a holiday in between. Feels like it was a while ago, but we've only been away from each other for about 3 weeks. So we will keep this documentation and make sure that it gets to you, because part of this will be, or this will be relevant to help also as you do your homework. We are heading towards the 5:30 time frame. So with that, I'm going to take a 5-minute break and bring you back at 5:32. And we'll go ahead and start that break now. So we'll see you in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, Waddell. I sent you a message, so.
Thank you, Janelle. I was just replying to you now. We'll look forward to seeing you at our next session. I appreciate your participation.
Thank
as
you.
always.
Have a good one.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much.
Wydell, it's John Mulford.
Hi, John.
Hi, I'm going to have to bail out.
Oh, John, we'll miss you.
But I'll be there for the next session.
Okay. Maybe early next week, take a look at your email for your homework.
I will.
And then feel free to reach back out if you have any questions.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Have a good evening, John. Appreciate you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. Looks like everybody's coming back. If you can come back on camera, we know you're back from your break. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started again. I wanted to take just a moment to circle back. I'm on the frame 4.07, so if you follow me at the top of the screen, you can follow where I am. There was a question, and I apologize, that was asked in regards to one of the orange cards, and it's the third card on the left-hand side, and it says communal response that is ritualistic, educates and informs of how it should have happened. There was a question in regards to clarification around that card. So can someone from the orange group explain the intent and the meaning of the card for us so we have better understanding about it?
Wydell, I'm going to ask if Dean will jump in for us here. It was a beautiful explanation he gave.
Thank you. So this is sort of what I bring to bear as a rabbi and clergy person. And I'm going to give an example of what might happen, not to signal that this is what should, but as a type of response. What would happen if anytime there were a murder in Tempe at anybody's hands, we collectively gathered someplace, whether it was an officer who was killed or an officer involved shooting or a homicide, we all gathered around City Hall and had a candlelight vigil, or we lit a candle together to signal that each loss, no matter how it happened, is a communal and shared loss. To allow us to move beyond labels of criminality and legal construct, and to say this is a human loss and we share this together. Something along those lines.
Thank you for sharing the intent of the card. We will keep that there as well. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm moving over to slide 5.03, which is a strategic planning framework. And the qualifying statement I would like to share is based on our pre-survey, the SWOT analysis, the case study. There might be some other themes of emerging repeating topics that I haven't captured here. That's why you'll see some of the blank items at the bottom. But some of the things that we have talked about is training and the training budget and diversity and equity and inclusion training. And I'll just kind of go down each column. The police service model. And another repeated topic was about laws and accountability. And I would make that distinction between state and federal law versus a city personnel policy, accountability, and MOUs. Another repeated topic is community engagement and communications, followed by, and these are in no particular order, but in this particular frame here, the next item is de-escalation and use of forces, policies, training, and mindset. Going into the third middle column, family and victim engagement, followed by data analytics and performance measures. Another repeated topic is regarding mental health and physical fitness. One of the early repeated topics was recruitment for diverse and fit officers. Another one was the community holistic approach, then engagement with vulnerable populations, as well as citizen review panel independent review. And then in the fifth column, crisis response prevention and increased role of Care 7, budget alignment and allocation, and then engagement with schools and community agencies. My question to the group is, have we missed any topics that have been recurring that would be part of our framework for planning?
Transparency.
Transparency, okay. Oops, forgive my typing there. Is there any qualifications around that, Lauren, that you'd like to provide as far as descriptors? Kind of.
Well, transparency and communications, especially around incidents. And processes. We'll have something happen and it will just be so unclear about what the process is going forward, how long will it get a response, you know, all that. It just needs to be clarified.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to lean on Elisa for typing into these at the stage. Thank you, Elisa. Any other repeated topics that I've missed here? Again, this is our capturing of from all of our notes. We want to make sure that we have kind of a framework. This doesn't mean that we haven't thought of something tonight or in the past, but this is a time to start capturing that for our planning framework.
We say repeatedly community or approach or engagement with community agencies or community communications, but I don't know that we have talked about officer engagement in the community as a contributor or volunteer or participant or facilitator of in some way, shape, form, or fashion.
Okay, so what would you like to see on the card then, Roy, as far in kind of officer
community contribution?
Okay.
Like tying in, because many of us realize that if officers live or participate in the community, there's a better relationship or interaction with the community.
Okay.
Sue Ringley, you mentioned that also, Sue, right? I know you're nodding your head, but I remember that from the last session. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So would officer community contribution and engagement fulfill that description for you both, or for the team here?
And I want us to be specific that we're talking about the officer being engaged at some level in the community.
Okay. Why don't we just say that, officers' engagement at some level of the community? That would be clear. I can remember that in 2 weeks probably.
Well, I think there's a difference in what Roy is saying from, you know, we can have officers attending community events and they can participate in school activities and things like that versus they are a member of the community in which they are protecting. I think there's a distinction there. You know, if they are in their community, they are a member of that community because they are a resident, then there's a different value on how you treat your neighbors as opposed to this person from this other place.
Yeah, and I think if we're gonna have community officers in the community engaging as a community member, they should definitely be unarmed officers. There should not be any officers walking around in their community or our communities that are armed with weapons that could kill us.
No, I completely agree with that. And I just posted something in the chat as well. So I said, it doesn't mean practicing your jump shot with kids in black and brown neighborhoods and with officers in uniform. Like what Roy said, like genuine connections within the community, not just let me get this off of my agenda, performative actions.
Right, because if they understood the community at a deeper level than just the black boy with a threat who has a toy gun, then they wouldn't be so quick to shoot us.
And just to jump in on this, and I think I'm gonna be pushing back on my friend, my homie Roy, for the second time today. I think the difference of strategy and vision and framework that I'm seeing here is I don't see it as a positive for more police engagement in these spaces. I just don't. I think I'm so far past the point where it's easy for me to believe that will lead to less violence or criminality of our communities. So there's one on here that says, community holistic approach. But I can't envision a scenario in which having, even unarmed cops in our schools working with our kids and their families is going to lead to better outcomes. I think we've talked about this for such a long time of community policing, these deeper engagements, these conversations, and have yet to see positive results, whether it's violence, fatalities, whatever it might be. So I totally get that this conversation that we're having as a task force is very specific to these policies and all these different things. And I'm happy to engage on that level and get into the weeds. I think that a lot of times folks think that people that work at progressive orgs can't do that, and we do it every day. But I just need to name like a lot of these center police as part of the solution when 90% of the time they're the problem. So
I don't take that as a pushback. I'm glad you said that because one, we need to see engagement. Here's my thing. As a city government, if a city government is coming to the community to say, hey, what would you like to see? This is my response to that. But I appreciate you saying what you said. I'm giving you what I would like to see. Right.
And that, Roy, is very eloquent in regards to when we do our strategic planning, we ask for what does it look like? What would a community with strong accountability and police trust and communication, what does that look like? So with that, is there any other
I do have another
emerging topic? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an emerging topic, and I'm hoping some of my colleagues can help me out here. But it's been kind of unstated, and that is from the beginning of this task force, one of the things that I've consistently brought attention to is that when we talk about public safety, that's code for policing. And public safety to me is not about policing. Public safety to me is about building tight and strong and healthy communities. And that means that there's economic, education, health implications around all of that. And this conversation feels really void of the intersectional issues that are actually sometimes why police are called to a situation. And so I think I don't know how to shape that in terms of repeated topic shaping the vision, but it's like a repeated topic that's not said. The other is about the complete focus on the police. I understand this is a task force to help reform or transform the police, but part of transforming the police is in relationship to transforming the community. And so what do we have in here where we're talking about like honoring the what the community already brings to the table? And I'm not talking charity services. I'm talking like the people who like take food to each other because that's their neighbors or help each other with their groceries. And there's just something that's missing for me in all of this around that. And then I just wanted to make sure, are these topics built on, like, are these explicit? Like if I said, I don't see the Family Bill of Rights thing on here, is that being captured somewhere else?
Yes.
Okay.
So let me give I love that you asked that question because it kind of leads to our homework. So if I were to bring you towards the future and we were looking back on, okay, what does that intersectionality look like that you're talking about, Raquel, in regards to this is public safety is more than just policing. And if I was a reporter and I ask you, tell me what that looks like now, because we've put all of this wonderful recommendations in place, which we're still getting to, what would that look like? And then we start, so we create specific actions around that. So I'll go back to something, very in regards to mental health and physical fitness, even though it's police oriented, we would say, well, right now, the police shared with us that they rely on the officers to stay physically fit for duty. I'm going to keep something as simplistic as that because I don't want to, lead anybody anywhere. But with that example, I would say, well, in my homework, which I'm going to move to 504, is what action that we could take to move us towards making sure that our officers are physically fit in regards to what would we do about that? Would we require annual fitness checks like we were talking about, you know, in regards to they do firearms fitness checks every year? Why aren't we doing the physical fitness? So as a strategy action, I might recommend that. So it doesn't exclude all of the other items that we've talked about as specific, like you know, the Family Bill of Rights. That's something that would be a strategy, you know, like to establish a Family Bill of Rights, which would move forward one of these, or maybe several, because these are all interdependent, repeated topics. It would move that forward. So that's really kind of bringing me to the next stage. So thank you for that pivot point in regards to, for your homework, we'll provide all of this to you, as well as a worksheet to help you on what we would like for you to think before the next session that we're having. What are the innovative, substantial actions that will move us toward the vision of having engagement with schools? What's an action in regards to crisis response prevention and increasing the role of Care 7? What's an action that honors what the community already brings to the table? And to your point about a strong community, what actions would we also take in regards to a strong community, in regards to health, economy, those types of things? So I would ask you over the next couple of weeks, as we send you your homework, we'll send you something early in the week that will, all of the documentation, but specifically these recurring topics. It doesn't exclude other items coming in. It just means we have to start framing in regards to the planning process so that we can get organized, and that way we can move towards what's our first year or our first 6 months priority, first year, second year, third year. So these are just kind of some framework elements that help us start priming questions for ourselves, because you've talked over the last 4 sessions, including tonight, about a lot of different ideas. So it's now that was kind of the big part of the funnel, and now we start to narrow a little bit how we organize our thoughts into these action plans, which is really what a strategic plan is. So, Jacob?
Right now? Yeah.
Yes.
I think I just wanted to, I mean, this seems to be a good place to, you know, on our last session, you know, the question of what resonates. One of the sticky notes on ours was humanity and dignity afforded all parties. I think those are some of the principles that go beyond, you know, a fitness training for officers, but really around dignity. That is in line with what, you know, honoring what community brings, or what Rabbi Shapiro suggested in terms of ceremony, or ways that we honor one another. I know that that's beyond kind of the strategies or the tactics, but I think it fits very much in the idea of the vision of, of the social equity, you know, the poverty issues, the other issues that have as much to do with the safety and well-being of community beyond just policing. So.
Right. I appreciate that distinction as well. So we know that we're heading close to 6 o'clock, and we did say that because we were going to give you homework, we were going to give you back some time, but there is one other piece here. So we'll send you homework. It's really, like Rosa said earlier, it's more of a thinking exercise, but if you would like to come prepared to the next session with your thoughts written down, that would be great. We will do more small group work as well as large group, and we'll start looking at the specific innovations and actions that will really move us toward that vision of, you know, the purpose of the task force being, you know, helping to create a community where there's high trust and accountability and communication and dialogue in regards to policing, but also looking at what Raquel said in regards to that whole public safety, that broader picture as well. So with that, I'd like to go to 6.01. And if you want to follow me, I'm going to turn it to Rosa. So good timing.
I know what I was going to say. Does anyone have any questions about those 16 areas, or what we're asking to do, or where we're heading? I think everyone does. Okay, I'm seeing everyone's fine. Good. Okay.
Yeah, good.
And I do think the conversations will get a lot more tangible in nature with the next discussion with your ideas. And to Raquel's point, one of the things, I have to share this because I was thinking as you were speaking, our fire department changed its name because the functions changed of the fire department, and they were now Fire Medical Rescue. So I can't help but to go there, Chief, and think about how our organization or how our departments have changed and evolved based on the needs of a community, and how that represents for a community. So Raquel noted, absolutely. I always think, who's controlling this? It's we're public servants, right? So the community dictates what our department should look like, or what the service they should be providing, or even the names. So I just thought that resonated with me, especially with our fire department. So with that, I thank everyone. I know this is probably the earliest you're ever going to get out of any public safety task force meeting, but we have assigned some homework, and I know that you all spend a lot of time chatting with one another and with us. So please write down anything that comes to mind. I think there are some great ideas about additional topics. I think Roy mentioned he would like to know a life of an officer from the beginning of his or her day to the end, and that would be helpful. And he has asked for the executive summary, or not the executive summary. Alana wanted the executive summary. Roy, Chief, wants the entire encyclopedia of everything that an officer does from the beginning to end. He's going to read it and then digest it and give it the clip notes to us.
Thanks, Roy.
But there are some suggestions, and so that we're going
to have a thesis to write, so I need all of it.
So there are some suggestions also from others. So we'll make sure to try to incorporate those, because that's important information for all of you to have. And thank you for asking. It helps us to shape the next session. So with that, I have nothing else. I'm going to turn it over to our mayor.
Rosa, I'm sorry, I don't mean to preempt the mayor, but there were a couple questions about adjusting since we had canceled one session, and being flexible in the process, adding additional sessions. Can you speak to that, please?
Yes. So recognizing, I think one of the things we heard, and I have not discussed this with the mayor or city manager Andrew Ching, but I think from the start we committed to saying that we would remain flexible. The conversation, the dialogue is too important. You all committed to having this go until December, January, but I'm going to turn to the group and we'll have a discussion regarding the next session is December 21st. And not sure we're going to finish everything by December 21st. I can tell you right now it's not going to be done, but that's okay. And we'll have a conversation as far as any additional dates with all of you. We're remaining flexible. So that's what I wanted to share. Is that it, Wydell?
Yeah, thank you, Rosa. There's questions about it in the chat, and I had made some other inquiries had come up along the way, so just wanted to go to that. So the other thing too is on the next frame of 6.202 is, what went well and what could be improved. Again, to Rosa's point, we remain flexible. The process is just a guide for us, but really it's your work that's the meaning as to why we're doing this. So we'll continue to flex there. So feel free to to add your comments there. And then Rosa turned it over to the mayor, so I'm going to do that right now as well. And we are on frame 6.03. So.
I just wanted to thank everyone again. I mean, once again, I know we're giving you a little bit of time back this evening, and that's always a really kind of welcome idea, given I know these meetings are always 3 hours, so a couple hours to give Roy a chance to write his thesis as he was talking about. So I want to be mindful of everyone's personal time. Before I go, though, I just wanted to quickly turn to Chief Glover to see if he had some additional updates for the group before we close out tonight's session.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. As chief, one of the things that I wanted to let the task force know is that I'm committed to being open, honest, and transparent, and I'm willing to be an agent of change. And I want this for our community. I want this for our agency. I want to inform everyone that we've been working through the Hawthorne Suites incident, and the investigation is wrapping up. And as soon as we have a final outcome, I'm committed to notifying this body as soon as possible. I cannot talk about the specific details of the case tonight, but with that being said, there are some policy modifications that the police department has been working through as a result of some of the recent cases that this group is familiar with. Since we are at the end of this meeting, I want to briefly just sort of go over some of the modifications that we've made. Our use of force policy that has we've made some small changes to that in terms of bringing us into compliance to have endorsements with the 8 Can't Wait organization. We are training this policy now, and we'll have them go live here later on this month. We're also have some new requirements in place, 2 levels for review of our use of force incidents. In other words, a sergeant and a lieutenant both must review, and this review must include the applicable body-worn camera footage as well. So that way, the entire case is looked at, and we're going through and really taking a good deep dive into what has occurred in a particular incident. And it's not just left to the immediate supervisor. Our use of force review committee is now reviewing incidents not just for policy and compliance, but to evaluate policy, training, tactics, de-escalation, professional demeanor, specifically as it involves unprofessional language that diminishes our trust. We feel that is so important, especially in light of some of the recent cases that we have seen. We are also working on establishing mandatory counseling program to help employees who may be responding to proactive efforts through our peer support team to get employees connected to counseling services, so that way they don't need there's no hesitation to engage. We want to make sure that they are getting the assistance that they truly need, and to ensure that we're providing just that specific piece of mental health, psychological help that they actually really truly need in their career. Law enforcement, you have a 20 for those that had come on before 2012 to those that have come on after 2012. They're going 25 years. It's a long career. It's a job that you have to have self-care involved. All these changes come with training and emphasis with supervisors who are receiving specific training now to reaffirm the role and their expectations. And so we want to continue to be open with that feedback and any suggestions that you may have in this process. So I just wanted to let you know that. And Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chief. Just a quick question for you. Actually, you mentioned something about the use of force policy being different moving forward, that it's no longer going to be just simply, so like what does the group currently do, and what's sort of the proposed change? Like you're saying before, they just sort of looked at a specific incident, but you're saying that looking forward, it's going to be, they'll look at a specific incident, but they're also going to then be proactive in making changes to policy to ensure it's not just looking at things as a one-off, it's sort of looking at making more systemic changes. Is that kind of what you're referencing?
Yeah, it's definitely more systemic in terms of looking at, it's a deeper evaluation. So if an employee has a use of force incident, we want to go back and maybe look at the history of what that employee has been involved in. Then we're also taking that a step further to evaluate whether there's policy or training that needs to be conducted. How does that fit into the de-escalation model that we've just started to implement, and only about half of our agency has gone through, and we're trying to get the other half through now. And then, is there a change in tactics? That's a huge one as well. Is the tactics that we're using really is it either outdated, or is it something that we just need to change because the tactics itself is just not really in our best interest to use anymore because of how awful it may actually be in terms of the way it looks. So we have to really take a look at that in a deep dive and evaluate those things. But I think one of the biggest ones here as a recent is taking a harder stance on the unprofessional language, because that rises and creates an escalation in the use of force that an officer is using, because now they've hyped themselves up into a situation where instead of de-escalating because of the language that they're using, now they have escalated the situation.
I was gonna, Chief, just a couple of things, just, kind of reading from the chat. I was wondering if there's a way to produce a document that sort of outlines the changes, maybe, perhaps what the current policy is now and the change that you're actually proposing, so people can kind of see side by side, kind of the progress from where, when you started to where we're moving the department to going forward, just so people can have something kind of moving, side to side. Would that be something you could prepare and kind of get to the group?
Yes, absolutely. We can definitely do a side by side, so that way the group has a more of a deeper look at what is occurring with our policy and how that's changed and how it's evolved. I think it probably will be very beneficial for the group to actually see that and to actually provide any feedback, because there may be some good feedback from it, from this body, that is going to help drive or dictate exactly which direction we're going to move here in the future with our policy.
Sounds good. Yeah, I agree with, Raquel on that. I think that document would be really helpful, just so people can have something that they can, have in hand and review. So I think that would be great. The other thing is, I know there was a conversation that Dr. Lerner raised earlier about whether or not we were going to add on an additional meeting because we canceled the one after Election Day. And I believe that we probably should. There's been a couple of conversations in the chat about issues that we may not be able to resolve with, frankly, only one more meeting left. And so as much as I would like to kind of give people their 3 hours and their time back, I think this group is really important. And I think having an additional meeting to really flesh out some of these additional issues, and even Chief Glover with some of the updates you're talking about providing to this group within the next, couple of days or so, I think it would be really helpful to be able to get this group back together and have another discussion so we can have a conversation about that. But obviously everything else, that people have been discussing over the previous 4 meetings. So I guess what I'd like to do, kind of moving forward is see if we can, Rosa, this is okay with you, email out to the group and see what might be available from a time standpoint for the majority of the members, so we can actually get the group back together, hopefully before the, before the end of the new year, or end of the current year, excuse me. I'm looking like 30 days ahead of here.
Excuse me, Corey and Rosa, I'm also wondering, I'm sorry, I hope I didn't interrupt. I'm also wondering, like, let's say some findings or recommendations are gathered, there needs to be time for the group to kind of review them and come back. It seems like there may be even another meeting that's required where we can kind of look at what's being sent to the city manager for recommendations.
To that point, Councilmember QB, my big thing, and I tell people all the time, I'm more concerned about getting this right and really getting consensus than I am about sort of sticking to a kind of rigid meeting schedule of 6 meetings in 3 hours. So if at some point, if we get to the end of that 6th meeting and we clearly feel like there is still kind of unfinished business that we need to wrap up as a group, I'm more than happy to have another meeting. And if the council doesn't get in, if Chief Glover and myself and Mr. Ching don't get the report until January, but we get it in February, I would be much more comfortable doing that, knowing that all viewpoints were represented and true consensus was reached, than just sort of pushing it through arbitrarily.
Agreed. I had one real quick question about in the use of force policy. One of the items that we've outlined before that is really problematic is reasonable belief. If you have reasonable belief that this person's a threat, you can kill them. If you have reasonable belief, throughout the use of force policy, you have this arbitrary measure that you can determine to essentially take someone's life. And we know with implicit bias that an arbitrary measure allows for 14-year-olds to get killed. So I'm wondering, have you addressed the reasonable belief there and made something more concrete so we move away from kind of leaving it to people's judgment on whether or not you want to kill someone?
So in terms of the reasonableness definition, and I've seen that come up in one of the other chats, I believe, in the last session, possibly. We haven't gotten that far in terms of addressing the reasonableness definition. So that's something that we can definitely talk about in future sessions.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, any final words before we conclude for the evening?
No, I'm good. I just, once again, want to appreciate everyone for, taking the time to come out and have a conversation about this, and, fortunate to give you nearly an hour back in your evenings, but I really appreciate the work. I mean, that even though, as we've talked about, we're at the beginning of December here, and I know we've got one more meeting scheduled, but the fact that this group feels so passionate about what we're doing together and trying to create kind of new community consensus about how we collectively move forward. Quite honestly, I'm happy that there's a lot of openness to having that additional meeting, and maybe even one more, perhaps, depending on where we are. I really agree that this work is really pivotally important, and we have to make sure that we get this right. So thank you, all of you, seriously, for your time and your dedication and commitment to this.
Thank you. And we'll be following up with documentation as well as some aids for your homework. And we'll lean on Brianne in regards to scheduling that other meeting that we're talking about at this stage. So thank you all again. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.